across these valleys. Before forts stood on these ridges. Before treaties, wars, or borders, this land was simply the High Plains. For thousands of years, life followed the seasons. Herds of buffalo crossed these grasslands. Antelope drifted across the sage. Wolves, elk, and grizzly bears lived beneath these same skies. Generations of native people came to know this place intimately. They followed the buffalo, raised their families, buried their loved ones, and passed their stories from one generation to the next. Every creek, every ridge, every distant peak carried a name and a memory. To them, this was not empty land. It was home. The Powder River country was one of the richest hunting grounds on the northern plains. It provided food, shelter, and freedom. Its value could not be measured in acres or miles, but in the lives that depended on it. Then, in the middle of the 19th century, another people began arriving from the east. Some came seeking opportunity. Some came searching for gold. Others came as soldiers ordered to build roads and forts across a country many had never seen before. To the United States, this land represented expansion. To the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho Indian tribes, it was their homeland. What followed was more than a clash of armies. It was a collision between two very different ways of seeing the same land. In the winter of 1866, those worlds met here. The events that unfolded on this quiet ridge lasted less than an hour, but its consequences would be remembered for generations. For generations, the Powder River country belonged to no nation drawn on a map. It was the homeland of many plains peoples. The Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, Arapaho all hunted here, traveled, fought, and raised their families here. It was a place of abundance, a country filled with buffalo, antelope, and elk, and clear running streams. To those who lived there, the land was more than a possession. It was part of life itself. Among the leaders who came to know this country better than anyone was a man named Red Cloud. Born around 1822, Red Cloud grew to adulthood during a time when the Lakota Nation was expanding westward along the northern plains. He earned respect not because he inherited leadership, but because of his courage, his judgment, and his ability to unite people who often acted independently. Unlike the United States Army, the Lakota had no single government or permanent army. Decisions were made through councils. Leadership had to be earned, and it had to be maintained through trust. By the 1860s, Red Cloud had become one of the most influential leaders among the Oglala Lakota. The rhythm of life followed the buffalo. The buffalo provided food, clothing, shelter, tools, and trade. A successful hunt meant survival through another winter. A failed hunt could mean hunger. When the herds moved, the people moved with them. The Powder River country was among the finest buffalo country on the northern plains. Protecting it meant protecting the future of their families. For many Lakota, the arrival of increasing numbers of immigrants brought more than unfamiliar faces. Trails widened, game was dispersed, timber was cut, soldiers built roads and forts. Everyone knew crossing of the Powder River seemed to bring another promise that the newcomers would soon move on. Yet, each year, more arrived. Red Cloud watched these changes with growing concern. From his perspective, no agreement had given outsiders the rights to build forts through this country. The Powder River country was not simply open land waiting to be claimed. It was the homeland that generations had defended. Years later, Red Cloud's words would capture the feeling shared by many who stood with him. The white man lies and steals. My lodges were many, but now they are few. The white man wants all. The white man must fight, and the Indian will die where his fathers died. Those words were not merely a threat. They were an expression of fear, frustration, and determination from a people who believed their world was disappearing. By the mid-1860s, neither side believed the other understood them. Army officers saw themselves protecting travelers and building roads across territory they believed belonged to the United States. Many Lakota saw those same roads and forts as the beginning of a permanent occupation. Two different peoples looking at the same country, yet seeing two very different futures. It was only a matter of time before these worlds and visions collided. For generations, the Powder River country remained beyond the reach of the United States. There were trappers, explorers, and occasionally military expeditions. But for the most part of the 19th century, few outsiders stayed for long. The Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho continued to hunt the buffalo as they always had. To many, it seemed that little had changed. But beyond the horizon, America itself was changing. The United States was growing rapidly. New towns appeared every year. Railroads pushed further west. Thousands of families looked towards the frontier with hopes of land, opportunity, and a better life. After the Civil War ended in 1865, that movement accelerated. Veterans returned home. Immigrants continued arriving from Europe. The nation's attention, once again, turned west. To army officers and government officials in Washington, the West represented possibility. Roads connected settlements. Forts protected travelers. Expansion was seen by many as the nation's future. To many Lakota leaders, these were not isolated events. They believed they were witnessing the beginning of something permanent. Each new road seemed to become another settlement. Every settlement seemed to call for a new fort. And every fort brought even more soldiers. Red Cloud watched these changes carefully. He had seen earlier treaties made, then broken. He had watched traditional hunting grounds go smaller. Neither side knew exactly what the coming years would bring, but events far to the west were about to change everything. In the mountains of Montana, men had discovered gold. Within months, thousands of fortune seekers would begin searching for the fastest route to reach it. That route would cut directly through the heart of the Powder River country. And once the first wagons rolled north, the struggle that became known as Red Cloud's War could no longer be avoided. News spread with astonishing speed. Within months, thousands of miners, merchants, freighters, and adventurers began making plans to travel west. Like generations before them, they were searching for something that had driven Americans across the continent for decades: opportunity. The Montana goldfields promised fortunes and wealth. Most who set out would never find that wealth. Some would lose everything. But in the following years, after the Civil War, hope itself was enough to fill the trails with wagons. Every week, new immigrants headed towards the mountains. Every week, they asked the same question: what is the fastest way to reach Montana? For years, travelers followed longer routes through established trails. Then, one man believed he had found something better. His name was John Bozeman. Together with mountain man John Jacobs, Bozeman mapped a shorter route north from the Oregon Trail through present-day Wyoming into Montana Territory. His route became known as the Bozeman Trail. Beginning near Fort Laramie, the trail stretched roughly 500 miles across open prairie, over mountain passes, and through the Powder River country before reaching the gold fields at Virginia City in Montana. It cut weeks from the original journey. For immigrants, it was faster, cheaper, and much more direct. Between 1863 and 1866, several thousand miners, historians estimate around 3,500 to 4,000 people, along with freight, outfits, and livestock, used the trail despite the growing danger. But there was one problem. The Bozeman Trail crossed through the very heart of the Powder River country. It passed directly through the principal hunting grounds of the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho. To many immigrants, the land appeared open and largely unsettled. To the people who lived there, every mile of the trail crossed country that sustained their way of life. The treaty that followed sought to establish peace and define tribal territories while allowing immigrants to safely travel across the plains. The agreements reflected a time when traffic through the region was still relatively limited. But by the 1860s, circumstances had changed dramatically. The discovery of gold brought far more travelers than anyone had anticipated. Many Lakota leaders believed that the government had failed to prevent the increased intrusion into their territory. To most immigrants, the Bozeman Trail represented freedom and opportunity. Families loaded everything they owned into wagons. They hoped to find gold or to open business supplying the mining camps. Many were veterans of the Civil War, seeking to begin new lives in the West. Few expected they would enter into the center of one of the most fierce conflicts on the American frontier. Merchants demanded protection on the trails. Territorial leaders wanted reliable communication with Montana. Army officers warned that without military protection, travel would become increasingly dangerous. The government concluded that escorts alone would not be enough. Permanent military posts would be needed. To carry out that mission, the War Department selected a veteran officer, Colonel Henry B. Carnington. Carnington had served with distinction during the Civil War, though, unlike many frontier officers, his experience lay more in organization than fighting plains tribes. His orders were straightforward: march into the Powder River country, build forts along the Bozeman Trail, protect the immigrants, keep the roads open. From Washington, the plan appeared practical. To Red Cloud and the leaders gathered around him, it represented something entirely different. A road could be tolerated. Travelers might pass through, but forts? Forts meant occupation. They meant soldiers would remain. The decision to build them would change the course of the American West. In June of 1866, government commissioners invited Red Cloud and other tribal leaders to Fort Laramie, hoping to negotiate another peace. As the talks continued, news reached the council that Colonel Carnington's soldiers were already marching north to build the forts before any agreement had been reached. To Red Cloud, it was proof that the outcome had already been decided. He rose from the council and walked away. Many of the warriors followed. Negotiations had ended. War was about to begin. In the summer of 1866, Colonel Henry B. Carnington marched north into the Powder River Country with nearly 700 officers, soldiers, civilians, teamsters, craftsmen, women, and children. Their mission was ambitious. Build 3 forts along the Bozeman Trail. Keep the road open. Protect the immigrants traveling to Montana. Those forts would become Fort Reno, Fort Phil Kearny, and Fort C.F. Smith. Of the 3, Fort Phil Kearny will become the center of the struggle. When Carnington first arrived in the Piney Creek Valley, he saw both opportunity and danger. The valley offered water, timber, and grass for livestock. Nearby pine forests could supply thousands of logs. The surrounding hills gave him commanding views from every direction. It appeared to be an ideal location for a military post. Yet, those same hills also overlooked the fort. Anyone standing on the ridges could watch every movement from below. In time, those ridges would become the eyes of Red Cloud's warriors. Construction began almost immediately. Hundreds of soldiers became carpenters instead of infantrymen. Trees were felled in the nearby mountains. Oxen dragged massive pine logs back across the prairie. Day after day, walls arose from the Wyoming earth. Barracks for officers, quarters, storehouses, stables, workshops, a hospital, all slowly began taking shape. By the end of the summer, Fort Phil Kearny had become one of the largest military posts on the northern plains. But it remained a frontier fort. Nothing came easy. Every nail, every wagon load of flour, or every window had to be hauled hundreds of miles across the prairie. Everything depended upon supply wagons arriving safely. For Colonel Carrington's son, young Jimmy Carrington, the frontier was both beautiful and unfamiliar. Years later, he recalled, "There was never a day without sight of leaping antelope and occasionally sneaking coyote, big jackrabbits, often in herds of buffalo in the distance, and ever the monotonous expanse of sage-covered plains, blinding dust, and big skies stretching to the blue horizon. Distant mountains, gorgeous sunsets, and the heat of some days, a shimmering mirage that looked like a great sea." For many families, the scenery was breathtaking, but beauty alone could not hide the isolation. Life inside the unfinished fort was difficult. there were few comforts. Many families lived in tents, while permanent quarters were still being built. Frances Drummond, the wife of Lieutenant George Drummond, later described their first home. 2 tents drawn together, containing 2 trunks, 2 camp stoves, a mess chest, 2 hospital bunks, a small heating stove, and a cooking stove. Then came the Wyoming weather. A deep snow fell during the night, drifted in, covered my face, and there, melting, it trickled down my cheeks until, if I had shed tears, they would have been indistinguishable. It was a simple description, yet it captured the reality of life on the frontier better than any military report. Most of the men stationed at Fort Fulcarney were not hardened Indian fighters. A few were Civil War veterans, but others were recent recruits who had never before seen the Great Plains. Instead of fighting battles, they spent most of their days swinging axes, sawing timbers, digging foundations, and repairing wagons, and of course, escorting the work parties into the surrounding forests. Building the fort became their own personal war. The greatest challenge, though, lay only a few miles west. The fort consumed enormous quantities of lumber. Every log had to come from the pine forest beyond the post. And almost every day, long wagon trains rolled out under an armed escort. Each trip required dozens of soldiers. Each trip carried risk. At first, the escorts saw only distant riders watching from the hills. Sometimes the warriors simply observed. Sometimes they disappeared before the soldiers could approach. The officers hoped these encounters would remain only observations. But they would not. Colonel Carrington understood the challenge before him. He was not merely building a fort. He was trying to establish a permanent military presence in the heart of a country whose inhabitants had made it clear they did not want him there. Years later, Carrington reflected on the men opposing him with remarkable honesty, saying, "When our wives and children were in peril, I could not but feel that if I had been a red man, I would have fought as bitterly, if not as cruelly, for my rights in my home as the red man fought." As the walls of Fort Fulcarney rose higher, so did the tension surrounding it. Warriors appeared more frequently on the ridges. Wood trains began returning under fire. Scouts disappeared. Livestock vanished during the night. The fort had been built to secure the Bozeman Trail. Instead, it had become the focal point of the war. The soldiers had finished building their outpost. Now, they would have to defend it. By the late summer of 1866, Fort Fulcarney stood complete. Its high pine walls enclosed one of the largest military outposts on the northern plains. Inside lived hundreds of peoples. Each morning began much of the same. Bugles echoed across the prairie ground. Guard details changed. Mules were harnessed, and wagons assembled. The wood train prepared for another journey into the pine forest west of the fort. Without those forests, Fort Fulcarney could not survive. But every mile beyond the stockade belonged to someone else. Red Cloud understood something Carrington could not ignore. The fort itself was difficult to attack. Its walls were strong. Its artillery commanded the approaches. But the soldiers could not remain inside forever. Every day they needed timber, hay, water, and livestock. If the warriors could make each trip outside the walls dangerous, the fort itself might eventually become useless. So began one of the most remarkable sieges in frontier history. The object was not to storm the walls, it was to make life beyond them impossible. Almost every day, warriors appeared on the surrounding hills, sometimes only a handful, sometimes dozens, watching, waiting, and testing. They fired on wood trains, captured livestock, and harassed patrols, then disappeared before the soldiers could bring them to battle. Margaret Carnington later tried to explain this unfamiliar style of warfare. She wrote, "These Indians are everywhere you suppose they are not, and are certainly to be nowhere where you suppose them to be. In ambush and decoy, splendid. In horsemanship, perfect. In strategy, cunning. In battle, wary and careful of life." To officers trained in conventional warfare, it was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Colonel Carrington carried an enormous responsibility. He commanded not only soldiers, but the families living within the fort. Every decision he made might determine whether mothers or children survived another week. But yet his orders from Washington were clear. Protect the Bozeman Trail, hold the forts, avoid unnecessary losses. Yet every day those responsibilities grew heavier. Carrington repeatedly appealed for reinforcements. He wrote, "I need mittens for my men. I need every officer I can get. There are but 6 officers for 6 companies." His requests reflected much more than discomfort. They revealed an army stretched to its limits. Among Carrington's officers was Brevet Lieutenant Colonel William Judd Fetterman. A veteran of the Civil War, Fetterman had earned a reputation for personal courage. He had seen hard fighting in the East, but he had never fought on the Northern Plains. Fetterman was confident, intelligent, and most of all, ambitious. He quickly became one of the most discussed officers at the post. Popular tradition remembers Fetterman for allegedly declaring, "Give me 80 men, and I will ride through the whole Sioux Nation." Whether he actually spoke those words remains uncertain. What is certain is that Fetterman believed the army should take a more aggressive approach against the warriors surrounding the fort. As the weeks passed by, that difference of opinion would become increasingly important. Lieutenant George Washington Drummond was very different. Drummond was young, energetic, an accomplished horseman. He commanded the cavalry detachment at Fort Phil Kearny. Drummond preferred action over caution. His wife, Frances, had only recently joined them at the fort. Neither could have imagined how short their time together would be. Captain Frederick H. Brown was another veteran officer. He had already received orders transferring him away from Fort Phil Kearny. Before leaving, he reportedly remarked he hoped to get Red Cloud's scalp. He would have one final opportunity. There are others who history still remembers. James Wheatley, a civilian teamster carrying one of his new Henry repeating rifles, and his companion Isaac Fisher, another civilian who volunteered to fight besides the soldiers with his Henry rifle. Bugler Adolf Metzler, whose bugle carried the commands of the army. And interpreter Portuguese Phillips, whose knowledge of the plains helped bridge 2 very different worlds. None of them imagined that within the weeks their names would become forever linked. The siege tightened. Every attack left fresh graves. Inside the fort, the cemetery slowly grew. Isolation became as dangerous as the warriors themselves. As the attacks increased, so did frustration. Some officers believed Carrington was too cautious. Others believed caution was the only thing keeping the fort alive. The disagreements were seldom ignored, but they were impossible to ignore. Every successful raid, every successful war party, every wagon attack added another layer of tension inside the officers' quarters. Outside the walls, Lakota and Cheyenne were learning how the soldiers responded. Inside the walls, the officers were beginning to question one another. By early December, both sides believed they understood their enemy. Yet both sides were wrong. On December 6, 1866, a fight beyond Lodge Straw Ridge, which ringed the fort, would change everything. Winter settled over the Powder River country. The days grew shorter, snow covered the prairie, and supplies became harder to gather. Every trip beyond the walls of Fort Kearney became more dangerous. By early December, the siege had become routine. Warriors watched from the ridges. The soldiers escorted wood trains almost daily. Shots were engaged. Horses were stolen and men were wounded or killed. Both sides were studying one another. Both sides were learning. On the morning of December 6th, warriors again struck the wood train west of the fort. This time, Colonel Carrington decided to try something different. Instead of simply driving the attackers away, he attempted to trap them. The plan called for two separate forces. Carrington himself would lead approximately 50 mounted infantry towards the attackers from one direction. Captain William Jeb Fetterman and Lieutenant Horatio Brigham would lead around 50 cavalrymen over Lodge Straw Ridge, hoping to catch the warriors between their command and Carrington's. On paper, it sounded like a sound plan. On the ground, the Wyoming winter had other ideas. The cavalry horses, though tired, still moved much faster than the mounted infantry. Within minutes, the command had stretched across nearly a mile of rough country. The two wings that were supposed to support one another became separated. The soldiers no longer fought as one force. They fought as scattered detachments. Lakota and Cheyenne warriors recognized the opportunity immediately. Instead of fleeing, they turned and attacked. Lieutenant Horatio Bingham's cavalry suddenly found itself very isolated. Warriors attacked from several directions. The fighting was sharp and confused. Sergeant Bowers was killed, and moments later, Lieutenant Bingham also fell. The surviving cavalrymen fought desperately until they managed to withdraw. Carrington's infantrymen still struggled to close the distance, arrived too late to save them. The army had driven the warriors away, but at a cost. Two respectable leaders at the fort were dead. The soldiers returned to Fort Kearney carrying more than casualties. They carried their questions. For Colonel Carrington, December 6th revealed a painful truth. He had discovered that once troops crossed Lodge Straw Ridge, he could no longer support them. The ridge itself blocked communication, visibility, and rapid reinforcement. Any command beyond it would be largely alone. For Red Cloud's warriors, the same battle revealed something entirely different. They had discovered that disciplined decoys could pull soldiers exactly where they wanted them to be. Once separated, the army could be overwhelmed. The battle had become a lesson. The next lesson will be far more deadlier. Among the Lakota and Cheyenne, the victory brought confidence. Warriors who had spent months watching the soldiers believed they finally understood how the army responded. A few riders would draw the soldiers away. More warriors, hidden beyond the ridge, could destroy them before help arrived. The idea was simple. Now, it needed only the right opportunity. According to Lakota tradition, several days later, the leaders gathered in council. They sought guidance for what lied ahead. A respected holy man, remembered by many accounts as Crazy Mule, performed a ceremony asking for a vision. Again and again, he rode from the camp and returned describing what he had seen. Crazy Mule left the camp and returned, staggering underweight, explaining that he had the lives of 10 soldiers. The warriors told him there wasn't enough soldiers, they needed more victory. He went out again and again and again. Then, on the 4th ride, he returned, exhausted. His horse staggered beneath him. Raising his hands before the assembled warriors, he proudly declared he carried 100 soldiers' souls in his hands. The camp erupted into celebration. To many of the warriors, the vision meant that 100 soldiers would die. Whether understood as prophecy, inspiration, or tradition, the story spread quickly. It strengthened their confidence that victory was near. Years later, White Elk remembered why the battle became known to Lakota not as the Fetterman fight, but as the Battle of the 100 in the Hands. Plans now began in earnest. Experienced warriors discussed the ground north of Lodge Jar Ridge. The ravines, the rocks, the folds of the hills. Everything that could be used. Young men volunteered to serve as decoys. Their task would be dangerous. They would ride within sight of the soldiers, fire a few shots, then slowly retreat. Not too quickly, not too slowly, just enough to tempt pursuit. Inside Fort Kearney, the officers knew nothing of the preparations. But they did know one thing. The attacks were becoming bolder. Fetterman himself, after weeks of constant skirmishing, had begun to appreciate the difficulty of the campaign. He admitted, "This Indian war has become a hand-to-hand fight requiring the utmost caution." It is a remarkable acknowledgement from an officer who's only remembered for confidence and arrogance. The days passed. The snow deepened. The cemetery inside the fort filled with new graves. The wood trains continued to roll. The warriors continued to watch. Neither side knew exactly the day the decisive clash would come. Only they could sense it was coming. Before dawn, on December 21st, 1866, the warriors took their places. The soldiers answered another call for help. What followed would become one of the most complete defeats ever suffered by the United States Army on the Great Plains. December 21st, 1866. The cold settled over the Powder River country like a blanket of iron. At Fort Kearney, it seemed like another dangerous morning. But beyond Lodge Trail Ridge, hidden among the frozen ravines and the sagebrush, beneath the snow-covered banks, nearly 2,000 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors waited in complete silence. They had spent weeks preparing for this day. It had been 24 hours since Crazy Mule declared that 100 soldiers would fall into their trap. High above the battlefield, several of the great leaders watched from the hills: Red Cloud, Little Wolf, Black Shield, Black Leg. They would allow the younger warriors to earn the honor of the day. Below them, Fort Phil Kearny stirred awake. At around 10 o'clock in the morning, the wagon trains rolled out towards the pine forest. It was the last time they would roll out before they would close up for the winter. Dozens of civilian teamsters and their armed escorts began their journey. Their daily mission looked no different from the countless others. That was exactly what the warriors had hoped for. Within minutes, dozens of warriors swept down on the wagons. The attack was fierce but brief. It was never meant to destroy the wood train, only to be seen. Back at the fort, bugles sounded. Signal flags waved from the hills surrounding them at Pilot Hill. The lookouts reported the wood train is under attack. Colonel Henry Carrington reacted immediately, but something was different. The attackers suddenly broke away. The warriors withdrew just beyond rifle range, waiting, watching, and inviting pursuit. A few warriors rode boldly into view. "Come and fight us," they yelled. Carrington answered with something much larger. A 12-pound howitzer thundered from the fort, and the shell exploded among the rocks, scattering the decoys. The warriors disappeared towards Lodge Trail Ridge. Carrington decided the wood train needed relief. The relief column would be the largest force officially sent from Fort Phil Kearny. The command was originally given to Captain James Powell, who originally was assigned to the command, but before he left, Lieutenant Colonel William Jeb Fetterman stepped forward. As the senior officer present, he claimed the command. Carrington yielded. Fetterman would lead. Lieutenant George Grumman requested permission to take the cavalry. Carrington agreed. Captain Frederick Brown, who was preparing to leave the post, volunteered to join. Brown had wanted to make one more bid to get Red Cloud's scalp. Two civilians also insisted on the expedition: James Wheatley and Isaac Fisher, both experienced Indian fighters and Confederate Civil War veterans. They wanted to test out their 16-shot Henry repeating rifles against the warriors. None of them actually knew they would never return. Before they departed, Carrington gave them one final instruction. Depending on the witness, the wording differs slightly, but in every version, it has the same meaning. Support the wood train. Do not pursue the Indians over Lodge Trail Ridge. Whether those were the exact words spoken, or whether they were misunderstood or ignored, it will become one of history's great controversies. Around 81 men marched from the gates, 49 infantry from the 18th, and 27th Cavalry from the 2nd. Around 81 men marched from the gates of Fort Phil Kearny that morning. 49 were members of the 18th Infantry, 27 were members of the 2nd Cavalry, 2 civilians, an interpreter, and a guide. Among them, the young bugler, Adolf Metzler. Like every bugler, his duty was communication. He could not have imagined before the day was over, his bugle would be his final weapon. The column advanced towards the wood road. The cavalry pressed forward eagerly. The infantrymen struggled behind. The horses were exhausted after weeks of campaigning. Witnesses later recalled that some infantrymen grabbed the stirrups and the saddle straps of the horses, even the tails, desperately trying to keep pace. The line stretched further and further apart. Nearly a mile separated the front from the rear. The formation Carrington had sent out was already beginning to unravel. Ahead, the decoys appeared again. Among them rode out one warrior, remembered by White Elk as Big Nose. He galloped back and forth across the ridge, stopping, turning, firing, making it appear he was protecting wounded comrades further ahead. White Elk later remembered. It looked as if Big Nose was trying to fight and hold back the soldiers in order to help someone ahead of him get away. It was the exact illusion the chiefs wanted. The cavalrymen, sensing the weakness, surged forward. The infantry struggled after them. The trap was almost ready. Beyond the ridge, Fire Thunder watched. The hidden warriors tightened their grips on their bows, war clubs, guns, lances. Every pony remained silent. Every warrior waited. Then, the soldiers crossed Lodge Trail Ridge. They disappeared from the side of the fort forever. White Elk remembered what happened next. The decoys crossed the soldiers' front. The pounding hooves made a noise like thunder, as he recalled. On the western side of the road, one of the warriors sprang to his feet and shouted, "Come on, we must start." At once, the hills came alive. Warriors rose from every ravine, every draw, every fold in the frozen earth. What moments before had seemed an empty winter landscape suddenly became an army. The trap had closed. Within moments of the ambush, the battle became a fight for survival. The cavalry had outrun the infantry that struck first. Lieutenant Grumman's horsemen fought desperately, but the warriors had already surrounded them. The soldiers attempted to regroup, firing volley after volley as they slowly gave ground towards the rocky hill north of Pino Creek. The battle no longer resembled the orderly formations of the Civil War. It had become dozens of small fights, unfolding at once across the frozen ground. The Coda warrior White Bull remembered the air itself seemed to be alive. He remembered. All the Indians were shooting. Arrows were flying in every direction. The ground was so covered with arrows that a warrior did not have to use his own. All the Indians were shooting. Arrows were flying in every direction. The ground was so covered with arrows that a warrior did not have to use his own. He could pick one up almost anywhere. Black powder smoke drifted across the hillside, hiding friend and enemy alike. Bullets cracked overhead, while arrows flew in waves. Near the center of the line, two civilians fought with unusual determination. James Wheatley and Isaac Fisher, carrying their Henry repeating rifles, capable of firing far more than the soldiers' single-shot Springfields, held the warriors at bay. As soldiers fell back around them, the two civilians continued firing, almost without pause. Several native accounts remember the deadly effect of the repeating rifles. Warriors who had grown accustomed to the slower cadence of the army muskets suddenly faced a stream of fire unlike anything they had ever encountered. Their stand brought precious minutes. Some historians believed Wheatley and Fisher accounted for a remarkable number of casualties before they themselves were overwhelmed. Whether the number can really be known is impossible to say. What is certain is that both men remained at their posts until the very end, entrenched in the rocks, fighting to the last bullet. Years later, the Cheyenne warrior Firebird remembered watching the soldiers fight their way up the hill, saying, "They charged up the hill, losing men as they went." Then he recalled the retreat itself, saying, "When the soldiers started back, I held my sorrow with one hand and began killing them with my six-shooter. For they came close to me. There were many bullets, but there were more arrows. So many that it was like a cloud of grasshoppers above and around the soldiers." His warriors captured something every survivor agreed upon. The soldiers never stopped firing. But when the weight of the numbers became overwhelming, the surviving soldiers reached the rocky crest known as Monument Hill. 49 bodies would later be found clustered among the rocks. There was little cover, only scattered boulders, frozen earth, and one final chance to resist. White Bull remembered watching the soldiers form together, saying, "They moved in a compact body, shooting all the time. They were half hidden in powder smoke. Even in retreat, discipline held. The soldiers loaded, fired, stepped back, loaded again. Every volley slowed another charge. Among the Lakota, the cost of victory was mounting. The respected warrior and the original decoy Big Nose fell mortally wounded. His friend Whiteout recalled him, saying his final words, 'Lift my head up the hill and place me where I can breathe the fresh air.' It was the last requests of a dying warrior, and moments later he was gone. Not every arrow found the enemy. Whiteout remembered that one Lakota warrior was struck in the forehead by an arrow fired accidentally by another warrior. Northern Cheyenne warrior Wolftooth ran out of arrows and hurried back to obtain more, narrowly escaping death himself. Another respected Cheyenne, strong wind blowing, was killed during the fighting. Victory was coming, but it was not without the sacrifice. As the soldiers' circles grew smaller, the warriors prepared for one final assault. Firebird remembered the order. He wrote, "We were told to crawl up on them. When we were close, someone yelled, 'Let's go! This is a good day to die. Think of the helpless ones at home.' Then we all cried, 'Hoka-hey!' and rushed at them." He continued in his writing, "I was young then and quick on my feet. I was one of the first to get among the soldiers. They got up and fought very hard until no one was left alive. I killed 5 or 6 soldiers myself, 3 with my 6-shooter and 3 with my arrows." Whether remembered with pride or sorrow, his account leaves no doubt to the violence of these final moments. Among the defenders was the bugler Adolf Metzler. Still a young man, he had carried the army's calls throughout the siege. According to long-held tradition, when the fighting closed around him and there was no longer a need for his bugle, he fought with the instrument itself. Whether every detail of that story is accurate cannot truly be known. But Metzler died besides the men he had marched into battle only minutes before. Lieutenant George Grumman continued fighting until he too was cut down. Exactly how William Jeb Fetterman died has become debated for more than a century. When Carrington's burial party reached the field the following day, Fetterman and Captain Brown were found lying close together. Each had a gunshot wound. Some believed they had chosen to shoot themselves rather than be captured. Several warriors later said the Oglala warrior American Horse broke through the final line of soldiers on horseback and struck Fetterman with his war club. According to the tradition, after the officer fell, American Horse got off the horse and slit his throat down to the spinal cord with his knife. Within roughly about 40 minutes, it was over. 81 soldiers and civilians had left Fort Kearney. None had returned. One final living creature remained among the bodies. A small dog wandered anxiously among the fallen men. According to a Lakota account, a warrior called Big Rascal pointed towards the animal and shouted, "Do not let even a dog get away." An arrow was loosed, and the dog collapsed beside the soldiers. There were no survivors. On the morning of December 22nd, Captain Tenai cautiously led a burial party north of Fort Kearney. The warriors had withdrawn. A winter storm had already began sweeping across the Powder River country. Gray clouds rolled over the Bighorn Mountains, and a bitter wind drove snow across the frozen ridges. It was as though the prairie itself was beginning to erase traces of the previous day's violence. When the soldiers reached what is now known as Monument Hill, they stopped in awe. Before them laid the remains of Fetterman's command. Captain Ten Eyck and his men had seen war before, but even so, they later admitted, nothing could prepare for what they saw that winter's morning. The official report sent back by Colonel Carrington, who later came and observed the battlefield himself, said, "Eyes torn out, laid upon rocks. Noses and ears cut off, teeth chopped out, brains taken out and placed upon rocks, hands and feet cut off and private parts severed." Other men, inspecting the aftermath, wrote, "Some had crosses cut on their breasts, faces to the sky, some crosses on their back, face to the ground. We walked on top of their internals and did not know it in the high grass. We picked up their internals, but did not know the soldiers they belonged to. So you see, the cavalryman got an infantryman's guts, and the infantryman got a cavalryman's guts. We hauled them into the fort, and made the guardhouse of the fort a dead house. We cleaned the bodies to be buried, and buried them into a large pine box." The reports are still difficult to read to this day. To the soldiers who recovered the bodies, the scene was beyond comprehension. Across the field, the mutilations were terrible. However, one discovery puzzled everyone. Bugler Adolf Metzler was found, carefully wrapped in a buffalo robe. Unlike nearly every single person in the command, his body had not been touched. No contemporary sources explain why. Perhaps it was an individual act of respect. Perhaps it reflected circumstances now lost to history. Whatever the reason, Metzler's body stood in strike contrast to those around them. As the soldiers gathered the fallen, the storm intensified. Snow drifted across the battlefield, covering the discarded weapons and broken arrows and the frozen pools of blood. The winds swept through the granite outcrops where only a day before 81 men had disappeared beneath a fresh layer of snow. Nature had already began reclaiming the ridge. The memory, however, would forever remain. For Colonel Carrington, the disaster was beyond words. Nearly 1/5 of his effective fighting force had been destroyed in less than an hour. Several of his finest officers were dead. The fort remained surrounded. Women and children still depended on him, and the winter had only just begun. Somebody had to take the news of the disaster. The nearest substantial military support lay nearly 230 miles away at Fort Laramie. Winter storms began to sweep across the plains, and hostile war parties still roamed the country. The journey bordered on impossible, but the task fell to the frontiersman, John Portuguese Phillips. Leaving Fort Kearny almost immediately after the disaster, Phillips rode south through snow, bitter cold, and territory controlled by hostile warriors. He traveled with little rest for days on end. After roughly 4 days in the saddle and more than 200 miles of dangerous country, Phillips reached Fort Laramie. According to later tradition, he staggered into the post nearly frozen and reportedly announced, "Here's your damn dispatches. But I have one thing to say. If you want to save those people, send relief immediately." Is that his ride became one of the greatest endurance feats and forgotten on the American frontier. Across the nation, news of the disaster spread rapidly throughout the United States. Newspapers called it a massacre. Many readers struggled to believe that an entire command of 81 men could simply disappear. Questions followed. Had Carrington failed? Had Fetterman disobeyed orders? Could the disaster have been prevented? Those questions have been argued ever since. The snows eventually melted, but the graves remained. The war did not end. If anything, it had only entered a new, more dangerous chapter. The destruction of Fetterman's command didn't end Red Cloud's war. If anything, it only proved that the United States Army could be defeated. Throughout the winter and into the following year, the forts along the Bozeman Trail remained under constant pressure. Every wagon train required an armed escort. Every woodcutting party marched knowing an attack was more and more imminent. The soldiers stayed huddled behind their walls. The warriors watched from the hills. Then, on August 2nd, 1867, another battle erupted just west of Fort Kearney. This time, nearly 36 soldiers and civilians hurried into a defensive circle made from wagon box beds. Hundreds, and perhaps even thousands, of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors attacked them throughout the day. The men huddled down in their boxes and put up a stoic defense. The men completely expected to be wiped out like Fetterman's command. However, unlike Fetterman's command, these soldiers carried the Army's new model, the 1866 Springfield breech-loading rifles. The new weapons could be loaded lying down and fired much rapidly than the old muzzle loaders. Again and again, warriors charged the improvised fortification. Again and again, they were driven back with stunning casualties. When the fight finally ended, the defenders held their position still. The wagon box fight demonstrated that technology was beginning to change the balance of power on the plains. Neither side could claim easy victories that had seemed possible. Even so, Red Cloud's strategy had already succeeded. Protecting the Bozeman Trail had become enormously expensive. Casualties mounted. Public opinion in the East grew weary of the conflict. Federal officials increasingly questioned whether the road was worth the cost. In 1868, the United States made a decision few had imagined only 2 years earlier. The government agreed to abandon Fort Reno, Fort C.F. Smith, and Fort Kearney. Before leaving, the soldiers set fire to the buildings they had worked so hard to construct. Smoke rose above the valley one final time. The forts disappeared into ashes. The Bozeman Trail was finally closed. For Red Cloud and his allies, the Powder River Country had been defended. The Treaty of Fort Laramie, signed later that year, recognized a vast Sioux reservation and acknowledged that the Powder River Country would remain unceded Indian land. It remains the only major conflict on the northern plains in which the United States abandoned its military forts and accepted native demands through treaty. Today, the wind still moves across Monument Hill. The sage still bends beneath the Wyoming winters. The same ridges that witnessed the battle remained almost unchanged. The Fetterman fight has often been remembered as an American disaster. To the Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho, it was remembered as something much different. It was proof that their homeland could still be defended. For the Army, the Fetterman fight was a painful lesson in underestimating an enemy who knew the land far better than anyone. But for both, it was still a tragedy. 10 years later, many of the same leaders would meet the United States Army once again. Crazy Horse, Gall, Two Moon, and an ambitious cavalry commander was leading them, Colonel George Armstrong Custer. The lessons learned on these ridges at Fort Kearney had not been forgotten, nor had they been fully understood. The tactics that overwhelmed Fetterman's command would appear again besides another winding river, the Little Bighorn. The Fetterman fight lasted less than an hour, but its consequences lasted for generations. It reminds us that history is never simple. There were no villains without humanity, no heroes without flaws, only people defending what they believed was worth dying for. 81 soldiers and civilians never returned to Fort Kearney. Many Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors never returned to their families either. And still, in the end, the land remembers them all.